the death of Jules Bianchi. In 2014, during the Japanese Grand Prix, heavy rain soaked the Suzuka circuit. On lap 43, Adrian Sutil spun off at turn 7. A recovery tractor was sent out under yellow flags to remove the car. But conditions were still dangerous, and no safety car was deployed. Just seconds later, Jules Bianchi lost control at the same corner. His Marussia slid straight under the 6.5-ton crane. The impact was devastating. His helmet took the hit, and his brain suffered massive trauma. Bianchi never woke up. He spent 9 months in a coma before passing away in July 2015, becoming the first F1 driver to die from race injuries since Senna. The incident sparked outrage. Critics slammed the FIA for not neutralising the race earlier, especially with a recovery vehicle on track. An investigation followed, but no officials were held accountable. Instead, the blame shifted toward Bianchi's speed and track conditions, ignoring the fact that the accident should never have been possible. His father launched a legal battle. F1 responded with a new system: the virtual safety car. Quiet, too late, and too careful. Like they were trying to move on without owning what happened. But his legacy remains. So does the silence. Nelson Piquet Jr. and Renault crashgate. In 2008, the Singapore Grand Prix looked like a strategic masterclass. Fernando Alonso, starting 15th, somehow won the race. But a year later, the truth exploded. Renault had ordered Nelson Piquet Jr. to crash deliberately on lap 14 to trigger a safety car, perfectly timed to benefit Alonso, who had just pitted. The crash was no accident. It was planned, practiced, and executed on radio instruction. When Piquet was dropped from the team in 2009, he exposed everything. The FIA launched an investigation. Renault's managing director, Flavio Briatore, and executive director Pat Simons were both implicated. Briatore received an indefinite ban, Simons 5 years. Renault got a suspended 2-year ban and a global reputation crisis. Piquet's F1 career was scorched beyond repair. Teams didn't want the baggage. Alonso denied any involvement and escaped untouched. The whole scheme revealed just how far teams would go for a win, and how little protection whistleblowers had in motorsport. Spygate. In 2007, Formula One was rocked by a scandal that read like a Cold War thriller. A senior Ferrari employee, Nigel Stepney, leaked over 700 pages of confidential Ferrari documents to McLaren's chief designer, Mike Coughlin. The files included car blueprints, tyre data, and even pit stop strategies. This wasn't gossip. It was the technical DNA of Ferrari's entire operation. When Ferrari found out, they launched legal action in Italy. McLaren claimed none of the stolen data made it into their cars, but the FIA wasn't convinced. After months of hearings, the verdict hit like a hammer. McLaren was fined $100 million and excluded from the 2007 Constructors' Championship. It remains the biggest financial penalty in sports history. Despite the chaos, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, McLaren's drivers that season, were allowed to continue competing for the drivers' title. But even that ended in dysfunction, with both drivers losing out to Kimi Räikkönen by a single point, Michael Schumacher's disappearance. On December 29, 2013, Michael Schumacher was skiing off-piste in the French Alps with his son. He hit a hidden rock, lost balance, and slammed his head on another. His helmet cracked. Though he was airlifted quickly, the brain trauma was severe. Within hours, the 7-time world champion was in a medically induced coma. The man who once defied death at 300 kilometers per hour was now fighting for life in silence. Then came the blackout. Updates stopped. The Schumacher family went completely private. No public photos, no statements beyond controlled releases. In 2014, he was moved home, still unconscious. In 2019, reports leaked that he was no longer bedridden, but nothing was confirmed. The last known footage of him was from that ski trip. Since then, only silence. Speculation exploded. Tabloids chased rumours, fake photos circulated, and legal threats followed. Family friend John Tott visited and offered vague comments. But no one outside the inner circle truly knows his condition. James Hunt burned out. This was the guy who won the 1976 Formula One World Championship in legendary fashion, but his life off the track was just as intense and far more dangerous. He was known for chain smoking in the paddock, drinking heavily the night before races, and showing up to Grand Prix weekends with women who didn't know what F1 was. In an era already loose on discipline, Hunt made chaos look like charisma. Behind the charm, though, was a man spiralling fast. After retiring in 1979, the adrenaline stopped, but the habits didn't. He struggled with boredom, depression, and an identity crisis no trophy could fix. He blew through money, dodged responsibilities, and kept partying well into his 40s. In one interview, he admitted to using cocaine and sleeping with over 5,000 women. By the early 90s, he was trying to pull himself back together. He'd landed a commentary job with the BBC and proposed to his new girlfriend the night before his death. But on June 15, 1993, James Hunt died of a massive heart attack at age 45. His lifestyle caught up to him, suddenly and completely. Heinz-Harald Frentzen silence. Heinz-Harald was once seen as Michael Schumacher's greatest rival. He had the speed, the podiums, and a factory seat at Williams in 1997. But the promise never materialised. Internal politics, personality clashes, and set-up disagreements wore him down. After short stints at Jordan and Prost, his career fizzled. He left Formula One in 2003, quietly and without a send-off.
That's where things got complicated. He vanished from the F1 spotlight. He dabbled in DTM, endurance racing, even solar-powered vehicles, but nothing stuck. In 2008, he was involved in a legal dispute over tax issues related to his post-racing ventures. His name faded from headlines, resurfacing only for brief nostalgic interviews or classic race replays. Unlike many retired drivers, Frentzen never built a brand. No punditry, no team roles, no social media presence. He later admitted in interviews that Formula One left emotional scars, frustration, regret, and a sense that he never belonged in the system. Once hailed as Germany's next world champion, he's now remembered as the nearly man. The driver F1 never wanted. Nikita Mazepin entered Formula One in 2021 with Haas. But his seat wasn't earned through junior dominance, it was bought. His father, Dmitry Mazepin, a Russian oligarch and majority stakeholder in Uralkali, bankrolled the team's survival. From the start, fans weren't impressed, but things turned worse fast. Before his debut, a video surfaced of him groping a woman in the back seat of a car. It went viral within hours. The hashtag #WeSayNoToMazepin exploded. Haas issued a statement condemning the behaviour, but took no action. The backlash didn't fade. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Petitions flooded in, but the money spoke louder. On track, Mazepin was slow, spinning constantly and never came close to scoring a point. Teammate Mick Schumacher outqualified him nearly every weekend. Inside the paddock, whispers of entitlement and poor behaviour followed him around. Then, in early 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that changed everything. With global sanctions closing in and Uralkali's ties to the Kremlin under scrutiny, Haas cut ties with both Dmitry and Nikita. Just like that, the F1 chapter ended. He later claimed he was cancelled, but the truth was clearer. Talent wasn't enough, and once the money ran out, so did the tolerance. The billionaire on trial. For decades, Bernie Ecclestone ran Formula One like his personal empire. He took it from a niche motorsport to a global business, turning chaotic race weekends into tightly controlled television spectacles. But behind the sharp suits and business deals were lawsuits, bribery charges, and power moves that blurred every ethical line. In 2014, Ecclestone was put on trial in Germany for allegedly paying a $44 million bribe to a banker to help secure the sale of F1's commercial rights. The case revealed shady backroom dealings and complex financial maneuvers. Ecclestone denied wrongdoing but paid a $100 million settlement to end the trial. It was one of the most expensive get-out-of-jail moves in sports history. That wasn't his last legal battle. In 2023, Ecclestone was charged with fraud by false representation for failing to declare over £400 million in overseas assets to the UK government. At 92, he pleaded guilty and paid £652 million in fines and interest to avoid jail. Ecclestone once controlled every driver contract, every TV deal, every camera angle, but his empire was built on silence, fear, and money. The courts eventually caught up. He didn't lose his fortune, but the illusion of untouchable power crumbled fast. The betrayal at Imola. At the 1982 San Marino Grand Prix, Ferrari teammates Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi were running 1-2-2 after Renault dropped out. The team gave the signal to hold position, no more racing, just bring it home. Villeneuve backed off, trusting the call, but Pironi didn't. On the final laps, Pironi launched an attack, overtook Villeneuve and won the race. Gilles was stunned. Post-race, he didn't speak to Pironi. To him, it wasn't just a broken agreement, it was betrayal. He told reporters he'd never forgive him. 2 weeks later, Villeneuve died during qualifying at Zolder while pushing to beat Pironi's time. His car launched over the back of Jochen Mass's slower-moving vehicle, cartwheeling through the air and disintegrating mid-flight. He was thrown from the car and suffered fatal neck injuries. He was 32. The crash devastated Ferrari and the paddock, but the tension never faded. Pironi was booed at races and isolated within the sport. Later that season, he crashed in wet conditions at Hockenheim, breaking both legs. His F1 career ended on that day. The feud was short, bitter, and irreversible. Mika Häkkinen crash. In 1995, during a practice session for the Australian Grand Prix, Mika Häkkinen's rear tyre burst at over 190 miles per hour. His McLaren smashed into the wall at Adelaide's final corner. The impact knocked him unconscious immediately. He wasn't breathing when paramedics reached him. Trackside medics performed an emergency tracheotomy on the gravel to keep him alive. Häkkinen was rushed to the hospital with a fractured skull, bruised brain, and heavy internal bleeding. He spent weeks in recovery, his future in racing unclear. The physical healing came first, but the psychological damage ran deeper. Behind the calm exterior, he battled anxiety and flashbacks. His return to F1 wasn't just physical courage, it was mental endurance. When he came back in 1996, few expected him to be the same. But 2 years later, he won the World Championship. Then he did it again in 1999. The triumphs made headlines, but the trauma never left. Even during his peak, Häkkinen avoided media spotlight and kept a tight circle. He eventually stepped away from F1 in 2001, still capable but worn down. Behind the stats and trophies was a driver who stared death in the face and kept racing, quietly carrying the weight no one could see.
Roland Ratzenberger, forgotten death.
On April 30, 1994, Roland Ratzenberger stepped into his Simtek for qualifying at Imola, chasing his dream in just his third Formula One weekend. A front wing damaged on a previous lap went unnoticed or was ignored. When he reached 306 km per hour on the back straight, the wing snapped off, and the car fired straight into the wall at Villeneuve corner. The impact fractured his skull. He died instantly. His crash was broadcast live, but the spotlight quickly shifted. 24 hours later, Ayrton Senna was killed during the race, and the motorsport world stopped to mourn its icon. His name was barely mentioned in the days that followed. No tributes, no silence on the grid, just a quiet note in the records. Inside the paddock, those who knew him, like team boss Nick Wirth and driver Damon Hill, were devastated. Ratzenberger had fought through years of lower-tier racing to reach F1 at age 33. His chance came late, and it was gone in an instant. 1982. Driver strike. The 1982 F1 season began with a standoff. The FIA had introduced a new clause in the superlicense contract that gave teams more control over drivers, including the right to drop them at any time. Drivers saw it as a trap. Sign away your independence, or lose your seat. Niki Lauda, freshly returned from retirement, led the resistance. When the paddock arrived in South Africa for the opening race, 29 drivers refused to race. They barricaded themselves in a Johannesburg hotel ballroom, sleeping on floors, eating takeout and standing united. It wasn't glamorous, it was a full-blown strike. Lauda and Didier Pironi emerged as spokesmen, negotiating directly with FISA President Jean-Marie Balest. After intense pressure, a temporary deal was reached. The drivers returned to race, but the governing body didn't forget the rebellion. FISA handed out suspensions and fines, trying to reassert control. Most of the penalties were later reduced, but the message was clear. Standing up came at a price. Walter Röhrl, rejecting Formula One. Walter Röhrl is a name etched into rally history. Two-time World Rally Champion, master of tarmac, and widely considered one of the most naturally gifted drivers to touch a steering wheel. But in the 1980s, Röhrl had a chance to move to Formula One. He turned it down. Not once, but multiple times. Teams came calling. Brabham, McLaren, and even Ferrari showed interest. Röhrl had the pace, the reflexes, and the technical feedback teams craved. But he refused, flatly. His reason? He didn't trust the politics. He thought the paddock was toxic, the relationships fake, and the danger unnecessary. In interviews, he described F1 as a boring circle of egos and backstabbing. He didn't like the idea of being part of a team that would manipulate results or sacrifice one driver for another. He wanted competition, pure and fair. Rally gave him that. Each corner was unknown, each stage a test of
Driver skill, not politics.
And those are the crashes, cover-ups, betrayals and breakdowns they never show in the highlight reels. Which ones do you know of that we missed? Share your thoughts in the comment section below as you leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this.